I'm Brice Futch,
I'm Spencer Amaral.
and this is The Way Forward. Welcome back to the Way Forward podcast. This morning, I'm your host, as always, Brice Futch, and today we have a special guest, Eric Teetsel. Eric and I met through the Club for Growth Fellows program probably at the beginning of last year, or beginning of this year now, rather. Spencer had a prior commitment and was able to jump in today, and so Eric has agreed to fill in for him, and we're really excited to have him here. I'm going to let him take a second and kind of introduce himself to you, tell you who he is and what he does.
Well, thanks a lot, Brice, and thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you here in the last year or so. Although we might have met prior to that, did we? Through Cole and some of
Oh,
those
that's right, we
things?
did.
Did we know each
Yeah,
other?
you're right. We did. You did.
Yeah, I thought so. Well, in any case, congratulations on all the neat stuff that you're doing. You're making a
Appreciate
big
that.
difference down there in an important place. And for those people who are just listening to this and can't see the screen, as I sit in the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C., and you hear the sirens and traffic coming through my windows, Brice is just lighting a cigar on his beautiful patio, swinging in a rocking chair. So I'm extraordinarily jealous of your life.
Yes,
Uh,
I definitely have the better setup today.
yeah, I'm the executive vice president of the Center for Renewing America, which is a think tank that was launched by a gentleman named Russ Vogt after he left the Trump administration that last time. Russ was the director of something called the Office of Management and Budget, which is probably the single most important and strategic entity within the federal government. Every dollar, every program, every initiative, every rule goes through the Office of Management and Budget. And if you have the right person and the right team there, you can make a big difference in terms of the future of public policy at the federal level, our spending, the rulemaking that happens unconstitutionally, and all the rest. So Russ left with a real working knowledge and expertise of how Leviathan actually operates. He knows where to throw the wrenches to stop those gears,
Hmm.
and built this think tank in order to take advantage of that knowledge and get prepared to utilize it should there be an opportunity in the future. So I was really excited to come over and work for him just a couple of months ago. Prior to that, was at the Heritage Foundation running their government relations team, and prior to that, was on the Hill for 4 years working for a guy named Josh Hawley from Missouri. And I've had a whole lot of jobs
Lieutenant Senator.
before that I won't run through. Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you being here today. I think it's really good that this worked out because I think having this election has been historic, right? First time since Grover Cleveland that a president has won re-election, not back to back. And a lot of people were very worried. A lot of people were very concerned. I think, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. My sense was it would be pretty close at the state level, but electoral college wise, we would have a pretty solid win. Not everybody was of that opinion, and I think we've done better at the state level than I anticipated that we would, which has been great. From somebody like yourself who has a really strong history in politics and campaigns and these types of things, is this something that was kind of surprising to you? What were kind of your general thoughts on this election cycle?
Yeah, I gotta be honest. If you looked at the fundamentals, I think it was hard to reach a conclusion different than yours. But we all lived through the last 8 years. We know the corporate media. We know how the regime operates. And so even as I was looking at early voting data, voter registration data,
Hmm.
looking at the state of the economy. We could talk more about some of the focus group work that I was involved in and where these crucial swing voters were when it came to the issues they cared about and how they were thinking about things. All of it pointed to Donald Trump. But I just, given the environment that we live in, it was kind of hard to feel optimistic, knowing everything that he was up against and the shenanigans that have existed in the not so distant past.
Yeah,
But I,
15, sorry to interrupt there. I mean, 15 million more votes for Joe Biden in 2020 is extremely concerning.
you look at the suppression of information like the Hunter Biden laptop story, you look at
Hmm.
Zuck Bucks. I mean, there's just so many reasons to think
Yep.
that despite everything we're seeing, there's something happening behind the scenes that could cause this thing to go haywire. But on election night, I, like you, decided to just put something out there based on what should be true, according to what we were saying. And I predicted that Donald Trump would get 325 electoral votes. The way
Nice.
things stand now, the only thing I missed was Virginia, where I live. I was a little too
Solid.
optimistic, but closer than people thought it would be, but we didn't quite get
Hmm.
there. I don't know that winning the popular vote is
Huge.
huge and something that has only happened twice in the last 38
Hmm.
years. You mentioned the Grover Cleveland fact. It looks like we're ginning up to have 54, possibly 55 seats in the United States Senate, which is a majority that
Hmm.
was absolutely the best possible case outcome
Right.
heading into election night, and retaining the House.
Hmm.
So couldn't have gone better. I think that's really good, obviously, for people who share President Trump's convictions and ideology. I think it's really good for the country.
Agreed.
We literally worked from home here in DC yesterday out of a very warranted concern that this would not be a safe place to be the day after
Hmm.
election day. And it was such a wipeout that you know, you can't really riot.
Right.
You just got your butt handed to you. You got to take
Yeah.
your hits and keep on moving.
And I was very surprised that at least all the commentary that I've seen from the left so far, they've been very accepting of these returns. It really was that big of a landslide that they can't argue it, which is again shows shows how much the American people are hurting right now, right? That they say that we cannot take another 4 years of this. My grocery bill is extremely high. My gas bill is high. My electric bill is high. Like I can't keep on with the status quo. And we saw that with the massive increase in first time voters, huge swing in independence, right? I think this was also one of the first elections where Democrats continue to go down, and those Democratic voters are at least self identifying as independents,
Hmm.
which tells us a lot about the future of our country. I think I'm very optimistic, not just for the next 4 years, but potentially for the next 12, right? I think in JD Vance, we have a great successor in line that's going to continue these pro America policies of economic independence, economic growth. And this also kind of kind of moves to the next question of sorts is, do you have thoughts on kind of what the next team looks like? I think there was a lot of turnover in that first administration within those first couple of years, and trying to get everybody in the right seat on the bus. But it seems like we have a really strong bench. I was very excited to see Thomas Massey getting potentially tagged, or at least they're leaking that he's being considered for USDA. I think that would be huge, kind of pushing back this regulatory state, right, that has put its thumb on the scale and on the back of American farmers.
Yeah, I think that is right. I sort of feel a little bit similar to the way that I did heading into election night when it comes to this question. All the all the facts are there. The history is there. It's all pointing in the same direction. But to your point, we have been here before, and it
Hmm.
was imperfect. There was a lot of good, and there were some
Hmm.
question marks that I think we'd all look back on and recognize as such. And of course, when you're dealing with human beings, everything gets complicated. And unfortunately, people can sometimes put self-interest and maybe
Right.
their own agendas above what even their boss wants them to do. And there's a lot
Hmm.
of that in Washington, D.C. So I'm choosing to be optimistic that, especially in a post 2020 Trump administration, where you had so many people who chose to work for him and then chose to burn every bridge and light their
Hmm.
former colleagues and friends on fire on the way out of the building,
Yeah.
that we might
Terrible.
have had sort of a purification of that. And those people don't get to come back. And what's
Hmm.
left are the people who rightly stood honorably, did the right thing, and are now hopefully in a position to come back, having learned a lot of lessons, maybe some fresh blood, and execute on the president's vision.
That's great. And I think it's also, I think the Republican Party is in a better position to exercise power. I think historically, at least in my lifetime, we've been the party of when we get power. Well, I don't know. I'd say back to Newt Gingrich, right? So since Gingrich, once we've seized power, it's like the dog who's caught the bus, right? We don't know what to do with it. We're ineffective. We don't actually move the ball, at least not in as substantial of ways as we would like. I think in the first administration, we saw some really strong gains on the federal bench. I think we missed some opportunities on legislation. But it seems like, especially with this this conservative trifecta now that we actually have the opportunity to get a lot done. The Republicans have kind of felt the shifting winds nationally and the desire for a more federalist approach to some of these social issues, which I think historically has been kind of the bread and butter of the Republican Party. And so it's not that we're moving beyond that. We're just kind of shifting our priorities for a stint. What are some things that you would see on the horizon as some really both strong priorities, but also realistic and something that we can get done in the first 100 days?
Yeah, you're exactly right, by the way, about Republicans having power. And there's an explanation for that, which is that the kinds of Republicans that were elected to leadership and throughout the White House, House, and the Senate did not share your values and mine. These
Right.
are regime politicians who had more in common with their colleagues across the aisle than they did with the people who sent them into office more
Hmm.
often than not. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise that you didn't see a stark contrast in visions and executive leadership between Bill Clinton and George W. Bush because they weren't so different from one another. Now, in the
Right.
time since, the Democratic Party has certainly moved away from Bill Clinton. And I think to sum up what happened on election day here, the Republican Party has now moved away from George W. Bush and Mitt Romney and
Yes.
John McCain. That
Hmm.
is over, dead, gone, never coming back, despite the hopes, by the way, of still a lot of people in this town
Right.
who I think probably at the end of the day saw the advantages of a Donald Trump win, but would have not been too sad if Donald Trump had lost and they
Sure.
had the argument that we should revert back to sort of Nikki Haley Republicanism, right?
Right.
Well, that's over. We're not going back. Now they get to decide. They're either coming on board or they're just fading away. So I do think that because of that, what you're going to see is going to look like a revolutionary administration in terms of
Hmm.
leadership. There was a part of me that wouldn't have been devastated if Republicans didn't control the House of Representatives. I'm glad they did. I think all in all, that'll be good. There's things like
Hmm.
reconciliation that can be done. Obviously,
Right.
having a little bit more leverage over appropriations, that's good. But the thing is, Congress does not pass laws anymore. That's just not something
Hmm.
Congress does. In the last, I don't know how long, recent American history, the art of governing has been completely given over to the unelected fourth estate, the
Yes.
administrative
Yeah,
state.
absolutely.
So all Congress does is really occasionally bring some bureaucrats in for so-called oversight hearings and then write checks to continue to fund
Hmm.
their work. That's the role of Congress. They need to take their power back. I'm not holding my
Right.
breath until I see them actually do it. So maybe
Hmm.
they'll do some good things, but the real fundamental change is going to happen in the administration as the
Right.
president wields executive power to constrain this unelected bureaucracy and then
Hmm.
direct the parts of it that should exist in the direction they should go with regard to things like securing the border, deportation, eliminating all of the regulatory regime around agriculture, around energy production, around business formation, all of that stuff that has calcified around virtually every aspect of the American economy and at virtually every sphere of American life needs to be broken and thrown into the dustbin. And I
Yeah.
think that is exactly what the president intends to do.
Hmm. That's really good. Quick comment on something you said at the beginning about the lack of difference between a George W. Bush and a Mitt Romney and a Barack Obama. Or I think those are the types of things that motivated independents and moderate Democrats to vote for Donald Trump, right? They saw that their party cared just about the people in DC, it cared about the powerful. It's forgotten its blue collar roots. It's forgotten about America, right? It's the forgotten men and women. How many times have we heard that line from Donald Trump? And it's exactly right. It's 100% true. And I think he tapped into that as well on the Republican side and motivated folks in a very visceral way that they haven't been motivated before. And I think that's really, really good. Talking about realigning power. So we've talked on this podcast a good bit about the right role of government, the right role of the different branches of government. I think the Chevron decision, returning that regulatory power to Congress is huge. I agree with you. I think I'm a little more optimistic, but I'm also more of an outsider, and I like Speaker Johnson on the whole. I think he's a pretty conservative guy and pretty conservative record, and I think he wants to do the right thing. I think he's just been, I think with as narrow of a majority as he's had, he's been unable to do it. But I could be naive on that. We'll find out. So I'm optimistic for the future. I think, like you said, an aggressive administration that understands the right role of the executive, that it's not to create law with pen and phone. It's to run the country, right? And to run these agencies, to hold their feet to the fire, to hold the career bureaucrats accountable, and to keep them moving in the direction of the new administration is crucial. I don't want to give away the farm. Do you want to share some strategies for ways that they can do that? I mean, especially with OMB, right? OMB is, like you said, a very critical part of that process, and the way we do appropriations and funding and then actual disbursement could potentially change as well. And I think there's some opportunities there to reclaim that right role of the executive.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like a cliche, but the answer is to return to the Constitution.
Right.
And
It's funny how that
recognize.
works so well.
Yeah,
You know, it's
exactly.
it's
All of these people work for the president, and that is a controversial thing to say. It's even controversial to say, get this, within Republican administrations.
mhm,
There's a fight going on about whether it is appropriate for the president to instruct, for example, his EPA administrator on the direction that policy should go.
mhm.
And there,
Crazy
people
town.
who are hired by the president who report to him would say, "You don't have the authority to tell me how to do my job." It's
Insane.
insane.
It
And
is.
and it and that is not what the American people understand, and it's not what the law is. And so
Hmm.
I think you're going to see some things happen that feel very radical. And there's the corporate media and the progressive regime. They are even
Right.
some of the Republicans. They are going to echo the idea that this is unprecedented. This is so radical. Donald Trump is doing all the things we said he was going to do. It's a danger to our
Hmm.
democracy. And I would encourage your listeners to ignore all of that and to
Absolutely.
recognize that what feels like radical is actually a return to the
Hmm.
Constitution, a return to the law, the way that the founders envisioned this system working. And if Congress doesn't like it, great. This is a perfect opportunity for Congress to reassert their authority and actually do something. If you don't want the
Absolutely.
president to do it, step up to the plate and
Right.
do something yourselves.
Yeah, and that was the whole idea of of having a house and having an exec or having a Congress and having an executive is that you're supposed to compete, right? You're supposed to compete for that power and that authority under the Constitution, and then the court's there to adjudicate. So I absolutely agree. I think that's crucial. It's interesting. So Spencer, our normal co-host, is also my pastor, and we're
Hmm.
Anglicans. And so, I absolutely identify with the idea that this may seem radical, but really it's a return to
Hmm.
originalism. And I think it's desperately needed here. I think too, Americans are going to see the fruit of that return very quickly, right? The market, the free market system is, and we've talked about this previously too, the free market system is the absolute best for human flourishing, right? It promotes good, it rewards good behavior, and it may take some time, but it naturally will punish bad behavior as well. And so I think with the market response to this decrease of regulation, it will be incredible. I really
Yeah,
think it will be like rocket fuel for our economy.
I think you're
Is
right.
there anything? Is there any one thing that you're very, I don't know if the right word, not excited, maybe excited. Is there a policy that you see on the horizon that you're very excited about that you think is just going to be a game changer?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really eager to get in the fight on is tariffs. And I don't know where you are on tariffs, Brice. I know maybe my views are not the majority view within our Club for Growth fellowship program, but
Cough, cough.
I just think that if you look at American history, it's inarguable that tariffs were the centerpiece of an economic plan that resulted in us becoming the strongest, most powerful, and most influential nation on earth.
Hmm.
And that made it possible for Americans to work, to provide for their families, to have two cars and
Hmm.
send their kids to good schools and take a vacation to the lake every once in a while, and that it was economic choices to globalize made in the last 30 or 40 years that completely gutted the ability of Americans to do that and have brought
Hmm.
us to the place we are today, where if you're more or less not a college educated person who lives in a big city, probably on one of the coasts, with a couple of exceptions, it's really hard. It's hard out there.
Hmm.
And that's the result of choices, immigration choices, trade choices, allowing China into the WTO, permanent
Yep.
national trade relations. When you decide to outsource an entire sectors of your economy to a place that it can pay slave wages and
Hmm.
disregard any and all environmental consideration, you should not be surprised when that part of your own economy
Yeah.
gets entirely gutted. And the simple fact is, and I'll stop ranting, God made us all unique with our own skills, abilities, and sense of vocation. We were not all made to be software engineers, accountants, and lawyers.
Hmm.
That is
Yes,
not God's plan. Some of us were made to do other stuff. It's not better,
absolutely.
it's not worse. It just is what it is.
Hmm.
And we need to recognize that fact and recognize that the most efficient allocation of scarce resources is not the measure of a strong country. There's a
Hmm.
different measure, a better measure. And when, you know, suicide is at an all-time high and
Yep.
deaths due to drug overdoses are a scourge all across the country, but especially in these places that have been gutted by globalization, we need to take seriously the question of who we are and what do we value.
Absolutely. And on the China piece, I think it's just so we are our own. Well, I'm not going to claim them as us. The globalists within our system of government are, in my opinion, our worst enemy, right? We have opportunities to hold bad actors accountable, and we don't. Like you said, adding China to the WTO, huge mistake. It kind of mimics the addition of these bad actors to the UN Security Council as well,
Mm,
right? Like
mm,
we now have no way to hold them accountable because they have a seat at the table as an equal, and morally they are not, right? It's shameful for us to say that all societies and all cultures are equal. They're not, and the West is good. I think America is inherently better because of the principles on which we're based, and that's rooted in objective truth and natural law. So
yeah.
we have that problem. I think tariffs are. I don't have personally. I don't have a big issue with them as long as they are being used strategically, right? If it just becomes this is our normal way of life, and we're restricting growth, then I might have some issues. But it's really a case by case basis. I would also almost make an argument that a swap from a national income tax to a national sales tax, something like the fair tax, could be not a tariff, but it has a similar result in that it equals out the price of goods, right? It increases the price of the foreign produced, and it reduces the price of the American reduced by reducing the tax burden on the employer and on the
Yeah.
manufacturer. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I don't see that type of overhaul in our future, but I would love that if that was to happen.
Yeah. Me
Well, this has
too.
been awesome. I really appreciate your insights today. This has been a lot of fun. We definitely need to do it again. Appreciate you. Appreciate your work. I would say go fight for democracy, but my new catchphrase is screw democracy, save the republic.
Not
Uh,
bad.
and I'm excited to see what these next 4 years look like. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Brice. You too, man.
We want to take a second and say thank you to our sponsor, Stand for Georgia Values. They are pro-family, pro-business, pro-public safety PAC based out of Cherokee County, Georgia, and they're the reason that we get to continue to bring you regular content. So we're very thankful for their support. You can find out more about them at gavalues.org. They're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Please make sure and go give them a like and a follow. We're incredibly thankful to have their support.